Hello, hello, hello. This is AJT500 slash Talented Track 98 slash Heloise Wonderwise slash Hilo slash Sarasa's Cake Heart. And this is going to be a different video. This is going to be the Sarasa conspiracy theory video and the rule of three conspiracy video. So this will be a little bit interesting. You already know it's going to wrap around to Earth, and obviously it's going to wrap around to Sarasa. But let's see what I'm talking about. So I have a notepad here. This is going to be one of these like scripted videos, and we've got some notes. So let's go through these notes and we'll just, talk, we'll yap. So have you ever considered, or have you ever wondered why the original Caim grids benefited from 3 Caim buffs from the back line? Why Galleon Staves need 3 of a specific weapon? Why you need 3 Medusa Katanas to go single-sided if you take out your Primarch or Dragon Summon. Why you need 3 Heldenhymnes to max your crit. I've thought a lot about Earth, as you probably know, but one thing I noticed recently after my water rant was there's definitely a plan going on with the way Earth grids were released. And I mentioned Sarasa in Advanced Enemy Tactics a lot recently, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt less like a meme, and I started to realize that Sarasa may actually have a lot more pull over the element than initially thought. So in this video, I want to go over how, in my opinion, Sarasa has influenced a large part of the primal grid creation, practically since the start. I also want to call back to the water rant, as I mentioned a timeline of sorts for how Earth weapons compiled on each other to push the grids in the position they're in now. The timeline is a chain reaction starting with Caim grids that go into Galleon Staves, into Medusa Katanas, into Heldenhymnes, and now ending on Bhaisa Staves. Now the 3s I mentioned before are not a completely solid rule, but I do think it's pretty funny coincidence that so many things come with 3 connotations to them. 3 is a popular number just in general, but there are so many instances of 3 related things with Earth grids over the years that not bringing this up for a conspiracy video felt wrong. Now to add on to that, obviously Sarasa is the 3rd Eternal. Her English name is Threo. She is 3. So I even have 3 things, 3 things in my in my mailbox right now. And this video is in the 3rd month of the year. Ooh, 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 ooh. So anyway, let's continue with the notes. So Caim. That being said, let's start with Caim and Caim grids first, and we'll move on to each grid defining weapon in turn. Now, I think that Caim is probably the weakest part of this argument, but his control over grids for so long needs to be brought up. As stated before, initially when his grids were used, he only provided an attack, defense, and damage cap buffs, gaining the supplemental buff later after his FLB. So what I mean by this, let's just go to his page. I'm talking about whenever Caim was backline before, you used to always take him for these specific buffs. This was only added much later once he got his FLB and once he stopped being a backline Betty. But beforehand, it was for these buffs, and these buffs were specifically 3 buffs. But that's pretty much as far as it goes, at least in terms of actual grids, as Highlander grids don't necessarily have a connection with Sarasa on their own. Although for Caim himself, it is interesting that his FLB made him not only transition from the back line to the front line, but he also brought with him Perma Water Switch. The water switch is important for Sarasa because she gains the ability in red HP to cap water damage at 3,333. So this is a massive boon to her. Again, I mentioned Caim was the weakest part of this argument, but I think starting with Galleon Staves, I think next starting with Galleon Staves, this is where the agenda can start to be pushed a bit more. So again, if you don't know about Caim when he comes frontline, he can make it so that all the elemental damage that you take from foes gets turned into water. And if we go over in here to Sarasa has this little passive here where when she takes water damage, she caps it at 3,333 when she's in low HP. So when she's in red HP. So that's important because Caim with Sarasa makes it so that she, kind of pretty much Caim caters to Sarasa. That's what I'm trying to say. But anyway, Caim aside, let's move on to Galleon Staves. So I'm going to pull up Galleon Staves real quick like. Now Galleon Staves. So Galleon Staves. Now every element would eventually get these resonator type weapons, but they all came with different requirements to activate. Wamdus and Lubo's weapons were based off of max HP. Percival and Howlmouth's were based off of 4 of a group of weapon, example 4 swords or 4 katanas. Charlotta's was based off of 15 or more different weapon skills in the grid, and Galleon's was 3 of the exact same weapon that were needed. Now I want to point out that all besides the wind and the earth one were reused in at least one other element, and for Galleon specifically, she was the first weapon of this kind that was released. At the time, when these elements were the main new grid pieces being released, a lot of people thought that maybe Galleon's weapon was a sort of mistake in the sense that no one else was getting the exact same mod as this weapon, and that it was more restrictive than all the other ones to be released in the future. I think people were onto something because I think Galleon Staff is where the rule of 3 truly ingrained itself in Earth. Remember our timeline from the start. Caim into Galleon, into Medusa, into Heldenhymnes, into Bhaisa. If you were around during the time of Galleon's release, you would know most people were saying that Galleon Staffs were finally the death of Caim grids, which they were. But if you think about it, it's more so a reset of the structure of Earth grids. With Caim gone, we were able to have a fresh start, and Galleon Staffs were able to act as a base for that. And thus our base from the start became the rule of 3. This means that until we completely phase out Galleon Staffs, and by extension weapons that were brought about because of it, we will be tied to this rule of 3. And realistically, even if Galleon Staffs do start to be phased out, until there is just a Resonator but better series that comes out, they will always be a potential option depending on circumstances because of their offensive and defensive capabilities and their special cap they provide. So the rule of 3 will always be something that can come up again in the future. We'll come back to Galleon Staffs again once we get to Heldenhymnes, but for now, let's move on to Medusa Katanas. Okay, so Medusa Katanas. Now let's pull this up. Let's pull this up next. Medusa Katana. Okay, the Medusa Katanas. So firstly, let's look at the Exalto skills of all the elements. Light and water both got crit on their second skill and crit amp on their third. Fire also got crit on the second skill, but got Death Strike on their third. Dark shares the Death Strike on the third with Fire, but gets TA on the second skill. Wind shares the TA on the second skill with Dark, but has Auto Amp on the third skill. And lastly, Earth shares the Auto Amp on the third skill, but has HP on the second. Since its release, Medusa's weapon has baffled just about everyone. I was huge on asking for Death Strike on the third skill initially, but once Dark got it on theirs, after fire, I was pretty sure that would leave us with Auto Amp, which turned out to be correct. This was disappointing, but at least predictable. The HP came completely out of left field for everyone though, so the question is why? Well, when you think about it, doesn't the weapon play directly into Sarasa? Sarasa has GTA, or guaranteed triple attack, when she's in red HP, so the need for TA on the weapon is diminished. She also benefits greatly from more HP because the higher her overall HP, the higher number her red HP actually is. So not only can she tank more hits in red HP, but it takes longer for her to heal enough HP to get out of red HP. And auto amp should be pretty self-explanatory in the sense that Sarasa is mostly an auto-based attacker who can do huge numbers, so I have a feeling that they chose to put auto amp here to help Sarasa reach those monstrous heights she can on auto attacks. I'm holding qualms with this weapon and other weapons for the end, but the last thing I want to say on this is to reiterate Medusa Katanas and honestly Exaltos as a whole, Primarch passives, and 6 dragon summons. All of their values could have been affected by Sarasa / Galleon Staves and the rule of 3. Because Galleon Staves exist the way they are, Medusa Katanas needed to end up where you had a spot where you could use 3 of them to play with the staffs. And because Side Games wanted to keep everything relatively uniform, the values of the Exalto, Primarch passives, and the 6 dragon summons for all elements all needed to line up in a way where you could utilize 3 Exaltos in a single-sided scenario. So the values of the weapons, Primarch passives, 6 dragon summons were adjusted to make this possible, and things like Revan's Part 2, Boss Zero keys, destroyer weapons, etc. were added to encourage this rule of 3 playstyle. But that's enough about Medusa Katanas for now. Let's move on to Heldenhymnes. So Heldenhymnes next, we'll bring up this joint. So Heldenhymnes. First, let's just address the elephant in the room. I ranted a lot about how these weapons have a medium boost on their mods, and the main conclusion I finally came to was that this was done to make it so that you could use these weapons with Galleon Staffs. But I'm only now beginning to see how far the rabbit hole goes down. Not only do you need 3 of these weapons double-sided to cap the Death Strike, but you also need 3 to cap the crit as well, at least in standard grids. The other interesting thing about this weapon is that it has a hit to defense for it. A hit to defense on it for 10%. And what's 10% times 3? 30%. There's that 3 again, but I digress. Now, why does this weapon have a hit to defense when seemingly no other weapon has this type of detriment? Is it just because Earth is so OP that it needs this hit? Or is it because Sarasa needs to be able to stay in red HP to do her maximum damage? I've talked a lot about advanced enmity tactics in Earth, and I think the root of it all is Sarasa. Side Games has said before that every Eternal is supposed to have a niche, and hers is to do the most damage at low HP. And the way to keep her in low HP is to make sure she takes enough damage to stay there. I haven't mentioned it yet, as it's not a grand weapon, but I think now is a good time to bring up as well that Heldenhymn was meant as a replacement for Siegfried daggers from the Revan series, which also played into advanced enmity tactics by giving you dot damage. Is my belief that they didn't want to contribute with the dot gimmick, or they didn't want to continue with the dot gimmick at this time, so they chose instead to give something similar to Heldenhymn so that Sarasa could stay in red HP through other means. And since we're on a side tangent about weapons, let's bring up Fronting too, because when people think of Sieg Dagger, they think about this weapon, since Sieg Dagger can proc Fronting's Echo passive, but even Fronting has a big enmity mod on it as well, and who loves enmity more than Sarasa? Even Hunting and its mechanics bend to Sarasa in the rule of 3. So pretty much what I'm saying here is we talk about Heldenhymn medium mods. I've talked about it at length before, but I also want to just show you the Sieg Dagger again, just as a refresher. Sieg Dagger had the take damage every turn skill on it, which before Heldenhymn came out, this was how you kind of kept your enmity, and you kept Sarasa in low HP because she would just be taking dot damage every turn while also taking damage. But the thing about it is most people think about the Sieg grids, they think about Hunting, because Hunting gives you a passive that it gives you an echo when you take dot damage, which they do work together, don't get it twisted. But the thing about it is even Hunting itself has this big enmity mod, and you could very much argue, oh, that's because, you know, you're going to be taking dot damage, so you're going to be taking damage, but you're going to take damage anyway. But who really likes the seeking enmity besides Sarasa? That's who it's for. And guess who's always in enmity? Sarasa. Who takes advantage of this mod more than like anyone else? Sarasa. It all goes back to Sarasa. It's all Sarasa. But that's it for Heldenhymn. For now, let's head to Bhaisa Staves lastly. So, Bhaisa Staff. Bhaisa Staff is here. So Bhaisa Staff. Initially, Bhaisa Staves seemed like they break away from Sarasa in the rule of 3, but unfortunately it's not quite that easy. Firstly, just realize that Bhaisa Staves play into Ogi related damage that is pretty different than everything Earth has been playing into the last few years with Medusa Staves, or Medusa Katanas, Auto Amp, and Heldenhymn Death Strike. Everything except for Galleon Staves, that is. Because Medusa, I don't know why I keep saying Medusa Staves. Medusa Katanas essentially do nothing for Ogi besides the extra HP and Exalto passive. And because Heldenhymns can be dangerous for high level due to the hit to defense, they make it hard to cap crit while also fitting in important weapons in the grid due to their low mods. And their Death Strike is not useless in a pure Ogi comp. Bhaisa Staff grids essentially need to go back in time in order to fill grid space, and what better weapon than Galleon Staves, which provide attack, HP, attack, defense, and special cap all in one neat package and perform their best when used as 3 of themselves. It makes them the perfect grid filler. So let's just go. I had Bhaisa Staff up, but I would just want to go to like an Earth Ogi or an Earth Ogi team like this one, right? So even here with Bhaisa Staves, you may think, okay, we can get away from it. Nope. Nope. The best thing to run here is 3 Galleon Staves. So we still can't escape from this rule of 3. Even with Bhaisa Staves, even though they're not going down the auto focus route, they're still stuck to this rule of 3 with the Galleon Staves. All that is to say, even though Bhaisa weapons attempted to make a split from the rule of 3 timeline that was Caim, Galleon Staves, Medusa Katanas, Heldenhymns, and start their own path, there's nothing else to fit into the grid that works as well as Galleon Staves at the moment. So the Bhaisa Staves get dragged back into the cycle despite their efforts. And even though you may think these weapons would be able to escape Sarasa too, not necessarily. Remember that the Eternals have unworldly modifiers on their Ogies, and Sarasa in particular is the only Eternal. Let me just bring up Sarasa again so I can show you what I'm talking about. So Sarasa, where was I? Remember that the Eternals have unworldly modifiers on their Ogi, so this. And Sarasa in particular is the only Eternal to not only sport 2 weapon specialties, she has axe and she has sword. Where was I? But also 2 different forms that she swaps between by Ogi. This means not only are her Ogis just inherently powerful to pair with the weapon, but she actively benefits from Ogi and swapping forms to utilize her full kit. So, if you didn't know, Sarasa literally has two different things. She gets different effects on these moves depending on which form she's in, and she gets a different Ogi as well. So she actively benefits from Ogi, and she has an unworldly modifier on her Ogi, both of the Ogis, to take advantage of that Bhaisa weapon as well. So what I'm trying to say is this chick plays auto and she plays Ogi. She plays ball in both sides. Also, side note, Bhaisa Staff comes with Bhaisa the character, who on first glance is obviously made for Ogi teams, with her CA reactivation passive and her CA bar on battle start. But this also benefits Sarasa because it can reset her S2 and allow her to fire off 2 of her incredibly powerful Ogis back to back. So again, Bhaisa, let's just go to my Grand Order comp, wherever it is. So this is literally Grand Order comp. This comp, you would think Bhaisa is here to just help with Ogi, and technically she is, with her passive down here that gives you 40% boost to all allies charge bars at battle start and CA reactivation. But this plays directly into Sarasa as well, because she essentially gets to use this unworldly Ogi into this unworldly Ogi, and this unworldly Ogi also has bonus damage on it, and technically this one also has a dispel and a boost her attack for the next Ogi as well. And if you weren't doing this in Grand Order, she would also swap this skill 2 times, and then she would reset this skill if you had pressed it on the first turn before you actually Ogi. So yeah, that's all things that Bhaisa herself also do to benefit Sarasa, which is just kind of crazy when you think about it. But anyway, that's pretty much it for the conspiracy talk. So to end this video, let's talk about how this timeline messed up the grids in general. Okay, so grid issues. I think firstly, what we need to look at before anything else is all of the useful mods that you ideally want in a grid right now. This is in the lens of an auto-based grid, or a grid that mixes autos and Ogis, and not one that purely wants to Ogi. I think the main skills you want from a grid are your Exalto skill, TA, triple attack, crit, death strike, supplemental, and damage cap. Then depending on the characters or the setup, you want things like auto slash skill, cap slash supplemental slash amp. So I'm saying auto cap supplemental amp, or skill cap supplemental amp, depending on your characters or, you know, the setup or something like that. And then impalement and crit amp. In my opinion, the 2 elements that utilize all these components together the best are water and fire. But I think water probably does it the best of the 2. So let's look at Earth's weapons again and compare it to water and see what went wrong down the pipeline. First, Galleon Staves. If we're being honest, outside of high-level Ogi grids, these have mostly dropped out of auto-based comps. They still can be used in fewer numbers since you can proc their effect all 3 Heldenhymnes, but it's rarely optimal. Wamdus axes and waters have also pretty much fallen off. So let's check this part off the list. So for now, let's just say the score is 0 earth, 0 water for prominent skills. Second, Medusa Katanas or the Exalto. Earth has HP and normal attack amp. Water has crit and crit amp. Just off rip, the normal amp is less useful than the crit amp, since crit can be used for auto-based comps or Ogi-based ones as well. But in general, having access to this skill isn't bad, especially for our current example. The bigger issue here is the HP. In my opinion, this HP is the first major mistake in current Earth Earth grids, and honestly the most fatal flaw. Because while HP is nice, it does not help to consolidate grid space, as it does not play into one of the damage related skills I mentioned at the start of the section. this immediately puts Earth one behind Water in terms of priority skills. And just as a side note, even though we're not talking too much about Ogi for this example, but Waters can be used in Ogi comps as well, where Earth is only used if trying to single side with Versusia main summon. And that is purely because we want to use the summon and need the Exalto effects. Again, the HP is good in high level here, but the normal amp becomes completely useless. So the weapon is counterintuitive because it wants to play both sides. That being said, with this, the total prominent skills moves 1 to Earth, 2 to Water. Third, Heldenhymnes. Heldenhymnes have Death Strike, Crit, and Crit Amp. This weapon puts in work to catch up to where Earth fell behind with Water before. We bring on the Death Strike and catch up with the Crit and Crit Amp. The issue with this, as I've said many times though, is that this weapon's mods are medium. This means you need more of this weapon in order to hit what you want to hit. And while it's not inherently a bad thing on its own, you need to remember Earth is already behind because of Medusa Katanas, and staying further behind with Heldenhymnes is where issues in grid building become more prevalent, as we begin to run more and more out of space. Water, on the other hand, gets Octavia Katana that sports more Crit, TA, and Death Strike. This continues their lead and from before by giving them more useful mods on top of their already perfect score, bringing the total to 4 for Earth and 5 for Water. Now for the impalements. Water was a good mirror for Earth in this example because they both got Ogi impalements, and thus they're not as important for this current conversation, so we'll move on. With that being said, let's take a moment to just look at the current grids we have in both elements. So I actually prepared a little showcase for you, a little showcase of these two. So right now I have an Earth grid right here. I have an Earth grid right here, and I have a Water grid right here. I'm using a surrogate main weapon for both of these just so I can show you like basic stats. But this is essentially the basic grid for like auto based stuff for both of these things right now, right? So you can just see both these, and I'll be flipping between these in turn as I talk about them. So let's look at the current grids we have in both elements, just based off the weapons we've described so far. I have a surrogate. I'm going up for the same thing again, but I have a surrogate main hand in both for now, but we'll get to those in a bit. Just looking at these, we can see that Earth has 2 slots remaining while Water has 3. So essentially 2 slots remaining here, and for Water you have 3, right? This should already raise some flags, since Water is also up in useful mods and now also has more space to work with. The trade-off though is that Earth is already at 100% crit and can activate its amp, whereas Water cannot. So right now you see in this grid, Water is at 67% crit, right? So technically, even though it has crit related stuff in here, it is not actually playing into this crit amp all the time because it is not guaranteed to crit. Whereas Earth right now, even though it is using up an extra slot, it already is at 100% crit. So it's already playing into Heldenhymnes amp. So it's actually utilized the amp. So let's see. Of course, that can be solved by adding in something like a Europa Spear or Folia Bow for Water, but not only does this return Water back to the lead in terms of useful stats, it also adds on extra mods like Strength or another big and small boost to attack, not to mention awakenings of damage cap or skill damage cap on top of that as well, which can skyrocket the score from 4 Earth 5 Water to 4 Earth 6 7 LOL 6 7 8 Water. So essentially what I'm trying to say here is since Water already has 1 extra slot, even though Water is behind on crit right now, you can easily take this slot right here and just put in a Europa Spear, and this Europa Spear gives you stamina on it, which Earth does not have. It also has this might and this damage cap, which Earth would not have with the same amount of grid slots, right? Or I can use, instead of that, I can also use something like a Folia Bow, which again, Folia Bow, this has another big boost on it, including the small boost, and it also has the skill damage cap and skill damage that Earth does not have. So just for example, let's just put the Europa Spear in here just to kind of fill up the slots, right? So if I put this in here, my crit is now 100%. I'm now up to where I was before, and I have all the stuff that I mentioned before. as well that they have for mods in here. And now I'm in the same playing field, but I just jumped another 3 to 4 mods depending on, you know, awakenings and stuff like that. That's what I'm trying to say with this example. Now, so now from here, for the last slots, you would usually just add in 2 PNS for both grids. So literally for this grid and for Earth grid, you would normally just add in 2 PNS for these last 2 slots. And a main hand of your choice. But therein lies another critical mistake, that being Grace Velger for water. Assuming you're using this main hand, the lead water gains in grid space becomes astronomical. The main hand oh, the main hand you'll be using in this slot for Earth is fronting, but it doesn't add anything in terms of the attack stats I mentioned at the start. So let's go ahead and let's just swap this to hunting, right? We'll just start swapping these around as I talk about them. So hunting, you see here, hunting doesn't really add, it doesn't add any of those critical grid components that I mentioned before, right? Then I come over here to water, and let's just stop on Grace Velger for a second, right? But we'll be putting this into the grid, but we'll just stop on Grace Velger. Let me see. Grace Velger, on the other hand, sports normal attack amp, damage cap, and supplemental damage, all maxed on their own from the weapon by itself. This completely deletes PNS in the grid for water using Grace Velger main hand, while also still keeping their lead ahead of Earth in terms of mods. I'll start to write these out so you can keep count. I don't know why I said count. So let me just add in Grace Velger, right? So if I add in Grace Velger here, I'm at the same amount of grid space as Earth, but now I have Grace Velger in, right? Now if you look here, Earth only has its NA amp from Medusa, its crit amp, and Death Strike from Heldenhymnes. That's the only mods that it has in here besides, you know, this Enmity, Fronting, and both of them, you know, Earth and Water both have Opus and Destroyer, right? So we're not really counting these two. But that's all it has. All it has is NA amp right here. Technically the HP, but the HP doesn't give us any damage. But NA amp, crit amp, and Death Strike from here. Whereas with water, if we go over here to water, right, we have the NA amp on Grace Velger. We have the crit and the crit amp. So we have crit here, crit here, crit amp here. We have the Death Strike here. We have the supplemental from Grace Velger. We have the damage cap from Grace Velger. We have the TA from these weapons. We have stamina or / another big boost. So we have either the stamina from here or we have another big boost from Folia Bow. We have the might awakening on this, or we have the skill damage awakening on Folia Bow. We have the damage cap, which would lead us to damage cap pin, because technically we're over damage cap right now. So even though it's only 1%, we're getting an extra 1% damage cap pin that we're not getting in Earth. Here again with the same grid slots, and or skill cap awakening on the Folia Bow, depending on whatever's in the slot, right? This puts Earth a massive six mods behind water just by maxing water's crit and adding a main hand for the same grid space as Earth. And even if you add on the damage cap and supplemental from 2 PNS onto Earth, they're still 4 behind. This is what I mean when I say that water gets everything for free, and why I complain about smaller mods in Earth. When you're already behind, you need bigger weapons, literally, in order to catch up, since we're limited to only 6 or 10 slots in the grid. But let's go even further beyond this as well. Water is still left with 2 open slots here, and what better weapon to fill them than with Bridekeeper? So we'll go to Bridekeeper now. We go to Bridekeeper, which has more TA and attack mod, normal damage cap, supplemental normal attack damage. Going back to our chart, it would then look like this once we've got a full grid, right? So if we make both of these grids completely filled out now, so we go up to this, 2 Bridekeepers, and then we come over here to Earth, and we drop 2 PNS in here. And these are our two finished grids. Once I finish this. So this is finished grid for Earth. This is finished grid for Earth. And this is finished grid for water, right? Finish like that. These are the mods we end up with. So going back to Earth real quick. Earth, we end up with NA amp off the Medusas, NA amp off the Medusas, crit amp death strike off the Heldenhymnes, supplemental and damage cap off the PNS. Water, you come back over here to Hraesvelgr, and you have NA amp off Hraesvelgr. You have crit from all these weapons. You have crit amp. You have death strike here. You have supplemental from Hraesvelgr. You have damage cap from Hraesvelgr. You have TA from all 4 of these weapons. You have stamina. You know, I'm not going to read these again, but all of these 3 are literally just the awakenings on Europa Spear or Folia Bow, whichever you choose right here. Normal damage cap from the Bride Keepers and supplemental normal attack on the Bride Keepers as well. So this makes 6 and 12 when it comes to the mod battle here. This keeps Earth solidly 6 mods behind of water, which is with a full grid, and hopefully that helps to illustrate how things like Medusa Katana putting us a mod behind and the lack of a mod filled behemoth like Hraesvelgr can make Earth grids feel lackluster. I do want to comment as well that this is not innately an Earth issue. It's just that it's the Ellie I play the most, so it's the one I experiment with the most. I feel like water is the most perfectly crafted at the moment, so I'm using that as the standard. But that being said, I do feel like other Ellies do get more benefit as well out of their grids due to consolidation of their skills on various weapons as well, even if they aren't perfect. Examples such as Winds getting big death strike and supplemental normal attack on Walford weapon and TA on their Exalto. Fire getting easier access to crit due to Finny Staff and their Exalto, which also has death strike as well as the ability to implement impalement with high skill specs. Dark having death strike and TA on their Exalto, being able to utilize impalement and capping normal amp on a Reshgiggle. Light getting access to amping normal attack damage and TA on Ura, using impalement and utilizing crit amp from their Exalto. So even though I don't think all of these are the best at consolidation of skills, the fact Medusa came with HP puts Earth behind every other element from the start. All right, so closing thoughts here. So where do we go from here? Well, I've said a lot in the past. Actually, let me go back to my thinking Sarasa. Let me go back to my Sarasa conspiracy. Okay, where do we go from here? I've said a lot in the past that Earth needed to replace its whole character roster for newer characters, and it did a lot of that last year, which is good. I'm in a bit of the same mindset for the grid as well, but that will take a lot more time, plus will most likely be pretty costly. I think one of the things that frustrates me the most about Heldenhymn is that it's new, so even if they do start to replace it and give another weapon or set of weapons the same mods, but consolidated, it's going to feel like a slap in the face to get 3 to 4 of these things just for them to get phased out so quickly. So I wish they had just started working on consolidation faster, but here we are. Realistically, I think the biggest stat we're missing right now is TA, and with Illustrious Transcendence, I really am hoping Hunting gets some type of permanent big trium or something like that to make up for the lack of TA in the grid. There are a lot of characters right now that have guaranteed triple attack, but most of them fall off after a turn or 2, and Raziel is too clunky to always rely on, so we just need some source of it in the grid, because right now we literally only have Extremity Key and maybe a World Ender, and there's not really any space to maneuver weapons around. So I just want to point out, let's just go back to this again. Just so you know, by the way, this joint literally has how much TA? This joint has 26% TA right now, but that is because Hraesvelgr has a minus 30% hit to T, or 30%, minus 100% hit to TA rate, right? Let's go to Earth. How much TA do you think is in this grid? Where's the TA? We literally do not have a minus hit to TA at all, and somehow we still have less TA. Make it make sense. There is literally no TA in the grid. The only thing we potentially have for TA in this grid is Extremity Key if we were taking it here, but honestly, with so much Ogi stuff in Earth right now, a lot of people don't even bring Extremity Key anymore. So we literally just don't have TA at all, which means we're completely reliant on our characters or MC just having innate GTA, and if they don't, they just get screwed, or they have to get paired with Raziel, where even if you do use Raziel for her S2, it only lasts for 5 turns. It's not permanent, and it's not recastable like Teking Octavia's S1, where you can use it every other Teking turn. Anyway, that little rant aside, did I finish this? Yeah, I did finish this. That being said, though, I know I ran about Earth a lot, but it's not necessarily weak right now. Just that it could be better, and we don't necessarily have to go down the path of water either. Even with our weird mods, we can still have similar damage, if not more. But that's where it comes down to MC and the characters we have, or if we had a summon to push us further, or like I said before, Illustrious Transcendence could push Hunting and the element to higher heights. Also, I want to go back to my Sarasa. But honestly, something just needs to change with the grids. I feel like all of the other elements at least have one slot to maneuver with, where I could see them putting other weapons in the future and slowly starting consolidation. But Earth is so fixed right now that literally any weapon we get will immediately have to bench another, even if it's just a dupe of one of our standard PNS Exalto Heldenhymn comp. But again, it will suck because those weapons are still relatively new. Even our PNS was the last of the series, so that's still newer for us as well. Overall though, this is just the ramblings of a madman who started to see patterns, and I feel like I talk about these points a lot, so I wanted to make a fun conspiracy video about them, because it does feel like in some roundabout way Earth and Sarasa has influenced the game a lot, and I love Earth and Sarasa, so I yap. So that is the Sarasa conspiracy theory. Yeah, the conspiracy theorio. And the rule of 3. Pretty much, there's just a lot of 3 stuff. There's a lot of 3 stuff, and it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit weird when you sit down and think about it. And I've thought about it a lot because I think about Earth a lot, and I think about Sarasa a lot. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna really ramble more because this was one of those scripted. I can't not deacon speak scripted videos. But yeah, it's just some food for thought. Just a thought. You know what I mean? It's just a thought. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's one of, I feel like the videos that I like doing the most are these like random, like I just started thinking about this and I was like, wait a minute, the more I think about it, the more 3s I see. I'm seeing 3 everywhere, bro. So but yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this more like conspiracy fun video, and leave your comments and thoughts below, and we'll talk about it, and we'll definitely be talking about it on stream. I'm expecting to get hit by a ton of 3 related messages in the future. But anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for the support as always, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye. Okay, so addendum time. So I knew I wanted to talk about this, but I never actually wrote it down. So what I wanted to talk about was I wanted to go back to this grid that I had made before, right? And I know some people are gonna say, well, okay, that's a good point about the Hraesvelgr versus, hunting thing, but what if you like don't use Hraesvelgr? Which, to be fair, at this point, Hraesvelgr is probably strong enough to kill like most of the fights in the game that you would have used like Mana Diver on in the past on water. You kind of don't use those Mana Diver comps as often anymore with how strong Hraesvelgr is. But let's just say you don't have Hraesvelgr, right? And let's say that you actually want to play Mana Diver on water. Because that's usually the main other thing that you use. But technically, even if you want to do that, you can do that too. So let me go to Mana Diver. So the little interesting thing about water, right, is water can use a staff or a dagger at the start, right? Like it can use it as its main hand, right? And guess what its opus is? A Teaking Staff. So when you look at that, if I swap to Mana Diver now, I can still have 1 extra grid slot to do whatever I want here. So I could, and it's like, okay, you're losing some damage cap and stuff like that, right? You can just do something like this. Put in 2 PNS. You can swap out one of these Bride Keepers, put in another PNS, and now you have a grid that is similar to the Earth one, right? But you still have much more stuff in the form of you get more TA here, you still get the stamina mods here, you still get your PNS, you still get the Bride Keeper or whatever weapon you want to put here, honestly. That's the thing about water, and that's the thing about having consolidation on skills. It allows you to get at least 1 extra slot. Whereas Earth does not have that luxury right now because the skills are so unconsolidated, mostly because of Medusa Katana just taking up a spot with that HP that you kind of just get cooked on Earth. And that's like the root of the issue, right? So I wanted to add in that addendum because it was something I was thinking about. Honestly, the same thing can kind of be applied for like Lancer Origin now too, to be honest, because you could just swap like this Europa Spear to your main hand for like Lancer Origin if you wanted to use that. I guess you are kind of cooked a bit on you're kind of cooked a bit on like Fighter Origin, but even then you could just swap out the Bride Keeper for some type of sword and use the sword main hand, or an axe or something like that. Use it main hand and swap your Opus back down to this slot. So essentially the thing about it is you just have extra slots. You don't have extra slots in Earth. That's the issue. So yeah, that's the addendum I wanted to add on here. Also, another thing, just because some people have mentioned, especially on yesterday's stream, that they had issues finding me on Twitch. My name on Twitch is TalentedTrack98. I will link it in the description below if you want to follow there. I am doing dual streams on Twitch now. So I'm streaming on YouTube and Twitch at the same time. So if you'd rather watch on Twitch, that is available. But I know some people were like, wait, you're AJT 500? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Hello. Hi, how's it going? But anyway, that is it for the addendum on this video. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks for the support as always. And bye-bye.